I'm sure you've at least heard of The Shining. Even if you haven't seen it, you've seen it. It follows Jack Torrance as he moves his family to the Overlook Hotel and slowly begins to lose his mind, culminating in the attempted murder of his family. And then there's the alpha couple, from the music of the Mountain Goats. They really need to get a divorce, but instead of doing that, they decide to wander around the U.S. before finally settling in Tallahassee, Florida. After months of building tension, they eventually burn their house down with themselves inside. On the surface, these characters and their stories seem pretty different, but take a look beneath the surface, and you'll start to see the similarities. Jack Torrance and the alpha couple share similarities and differences in their settings of their respective stories, their relationships, and their character arcs. In the album that concludes their story, the alpha couple move into a house on Southwood Plantation Road in Tallahassee, Florida. It's pretty decrepit and is implied to be haunted, either literally or metaphorically. The narrator dreams of ghosts, bodies bloat in the basement, and the house is even compared to a graveyard. The state of the house reflects their relationship, broken and haunted by the past, barely standing. Meanwhile, in The Shining, Jack Torrance and his family move into the massive Overlook Hotel for the winter, deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. When a party is raging in the supposedly empty hotel, he meets the spirit of the old caretaker, Grady, who urges him to kill his family as Grady once did. He also encounters Grady's dead wife in the bathroom of room 237. It seems as though the spirits of the Overlook influence Jack more than reflect him. However, the framing of both stories leaves it ambiguous as to whether Southwood Plantation Road or the Overlook are actually haunted. The Alphas and Jack are implied to be having at least minor sanity breaks. However, they are both trapped. Tallahassee only has one song that takes place outside of the house, and Jack Torrance never leaves the Overlook alive. This only serves one of the central themes of both narratives. As I mentioned earlier, many of the alpha couple's songs focus on their relationship. An interesting aspect of all of them is that the gender of the narrator or their spouse isn't often mentioned. The characters are usually seen as interchangeable, and more than anything, they're always positioned alongside each other, at least in Tallahassee. While the characters do fight, there's not much of a power differential. On the other hand, in The Shining, Jack is very much positioned above his wife Wendy and son Danny. Before they moved to the Overlook, he grabbed Danny's arm and dislocated it. During the film itself, he becomes increasingly cruel to Wendy, who seems afraid of him at many points. He has final say over whether the family stays or leaves, even destroying the snowcat and the two-way radio that Wendy was using to communicate with the outside world. This culminates in his murder of Halloran and the attempted murder of his wife. Both of these stories revolve around people doing terrible things to those they love. While the alpha couple are a bit more complicated than the Torrances, both of these relationships are mirrored by the setting to some degree. We've already talked about Southwood Plantation Road, but the isolation of the Overlook Hotel serves and reflects the absolute power Jack has over his family. The alpha couple are very similar, very self-destructive people. They're very toxic and it can really only be described as desperate. They also seem to be having problems functioning just in general. They live in poverty, they have few friends, and are addicted to alcohol and potentially other drugs. Meanwhile, Jack Torrance is pretty different from his reserved, anxious wife and child. He is confident and charming when talking to the managers of the Overlook, and they respect him. He seems not so much self-destructive as violent and obsessive. He doesn't want to leave the Overlook because he wants to finish his job. He's also a recovering alcoholic who potentially relapses during a scene in the ballroom. All of these characters gradually grow more violent over the course of their stories. The penultimate alpha song has them in a brutal fight, and as we mentioned before, Jack murders somebody and tries to kill his family. They also both meet ambiguous ends. The language used on the Tallahassee site is incredibly vague about what actually happens to the alpha couple after their house burns down, and Jack is shown to have frozen to death, but also appears in the photo of the Overlook's 4th of July party. Throughout their stories, the alpha couple and Jack Torrance display numerous similarities. I could talk for hours about smaller similarities that I didn't get to discuss here, but the point is that their settings, relationships, and character arcs all share important details. Hopefully, I've made a good enough case for you to agree.